Welcome to the Karma Army. Names and details have been changed, but the justice? Every word of it is real. I want to tell you about a man named Richard Holt. Richard was my direct manager for 3 years at a mid-sized logistics company in the north of England. And for 3 years, I watched him destroy careers, crush ambition, and take personal credit for the work of everyone around him, all while being celebrated upstairs as one of the company's most effective leaders. This is the story of how that ended. I joined the company fresh out of university, eager and perhaps a little naive. Richard seemed charming in the interview, confident, articulate, the kind of man who fills a room. I was impressed. Most people were at first. He had the vocabulary of someone who had spent a great deal of time around important people. He used words like strategic alignment and capability framework, and he said them with such conviction that you found yourself nodding along before you had fully processed what they meant. It took about 6 weeks before I saw the other side of him. We had a team of 7. Richard managed us with what I can only describe as calculated cruelty. He was never overtly aggressive, never shouted, never swore. His method was far more insidious than that. He operated through humiliation disguised as feedback, through exclusion framed as efficiency, and through a kind of relentless, low-grade undermining that made you question your own competence on a daily basis. If you presented an idea in a meeting, Richard would dismiss it, sometimes without even looking up from his notes. A small sigh, a pause just long enough to feel deliberate. "I think we need to be a bit more rigorous in our thinking here." That was his phrase. I heard it so many times that I began to hear it in my sleep. Not directed at everyone, Richard was surgical in his targeting. He chose the people who showed the most promise, the ones who might eventually represent a threat to his position, and he worked on them quietly and consistently until their confidence eroded. Then, 3 weeks after dismissing an idea in a team meeting, he would present that exact idea to senior leadership as his own. And he was good at it. He had the polish, the vocabulary, the confidence. Nobody questioned him. Why would they? He was the manager. The ideas came from his department. That meant, in the unspoken logic of corporate hierarchy, that they came from him. I started keeping a record in month 4. Nothing dramatic, just a simple document on my personal laptop. Dates, ideas, emails, meeting notes. Every time I contributed something that later appeared under Richard's name, I logged it. I noted the date I had raised the idea, who else had been present, and the date Richard subsequently presented it. I saved email threads where I had proposed a solution, followed by calendar invitations where Richard presented that solution to the floor above without mentioning my name. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just knew that one day I might need it. The team was in a constant state of low-level dread. People called in sick more than at any job I had worked before. The conversations in the car park, the real conversations, the ones people have when they are sure the building cannot hear them, were always the same. Nobody wanted to say it directly, but everybody knew. 2 colleagues left within my first year, both of them talented, both of them citing personal reasons that everyone privately understood to mean Richard. One of them, a woman who had been at the company for 6 years, sent me a message on her last day that simply said, "Get out while you still believe in yourself." I kept that message. I added it to the document. The turnover cost the company money, but Richard always had an explanation ready. The wrong hire, not the right cultural fit, restructuring pressures. He was very good at managing upward, at presenting problems in a way that made him appear to be part of the solution rather than the source of the difficulty. Then we got a new HR director. Her name was Caroline Marsh. She had come from a larger organization and brought with her the unsettling habit of actually paying attention. She didn't just process paperwork. She attended team meetings unannounced. She had coffee with junior staff and asked open questions, and then sat quietly while they answered. Within 3 months of her arrival, she had noticed the pattern of departures from our department and requested exit interview data going back 2 years. I do not know exactly what those exit interviews said, but I can tell you that shortly after Caroline reviewed them, she came to speak to me directly. She was not accusatory. She did not arrive with a clipboard or a formal agenda. She simply asked how I was finding things, whether I felt supported in my role, whether there was anything about the team's working environment that I thought leadership should be aware of. I told her I had some documentation she might find useful. I handed over 18 months of notes, ideas with timestamps, emails where I had proposed something, followed by presentations where Richard had delivered those same ideas, sometimes verbatim, without attribution. I included a message chain between myself and the colleague who had resigned the previous summer, in which she described, in her own words, why she had really left. I had asked her permission before including it. She had sent back 3 words: "Use everything you have." Caroline thanked me. She asked me to keep the matter confidential for the time being, and she told me she would be in touch. 3 weeks passed, then 4. I began to wonder if anything would come of it at all. Richard continued as normal, dismissing, undermining, presenting, being praised. I watched him accept a commendation at the quarterly all-hands meeting for a process improvement that had originated word for word in a document I had submitted to him 6 months earlier. I sat in the 3rd row and clapped with everyone else and thought, with some bitterness, that perhaps nothing was going to change. Then, on a Tuesday morning in October, Richard did not come into the office. His desk sat empty all day. Nobody said anything officially. There was a kind of suspended energy in the room, people working with slightly more focus than usual, as if concentrating hard enough might prevent whatever was happening from being real. By Thursday, there was a brief email from the head of operations saying that Richard had left the company and that interim management arrangements were being put in place. No details, no farewell, no leaving card passed around with a collection envelope. He was simply gone. I later learned, through the careful, indirect channels that offices run on, that the investigation had turned up considerably more than my documentation alone. 2 other team members had come forward once they knew an investigation was underway. There were formal complaints going back further than I had realized. And critically, Richard had been caught in something far more serious than credit theft. He had been approving invoices from a vendor that on closer inspection had a direct connection to a family member of his. It was not a vast sum, but it was verifiable, it was documented, and it was a clear conflict of interest that he had concealed for over 2 years. When Caroline's investigation combined my records with the financial irregularities, the case became something that could no longer be quietly managed. He was dismissed without notice. No settlement, no reference, no quiet handshake at the door. He left the building on a Tuesday afternoon with a box of his personal items and was escorted to the car park by a member of facilities. I stayed at that company for another 2 years. The team rebuilt slowly. People who had gone quiet began to speak again in meetings. New ideas got a response other than a sigh and a pointed silence. The sick days dropped. Someone even laughed at something during a Tuesday briefing, which sounds like a small thing, but if you have ever worked under someone like Richard Holt, you will understand exactly how significant that was. I think about him sometimes, not with malice, I am mostly past that, but I think about all the people whose confidence he quietly eroded over the years. The colleagues who left and told themselves they simply weren't cut out for it. The ones who stayed and made themselves smaller because making yourself smaller felt safer than being a target. And I think about how, in the end, the record I had kept on a personal laptop started with no real plan, out of nothing more than a stubborn refusal to let it go undocumented, became part of the reason he lost everything he had spent his career building. Richard Holt was not the most powerful man in that building. He just thought he was. There is a difference, and eventually that difference always matters. I am part of the Karma Army, and if you have ever worked for someone like Richard, if you have sat in that meeting and watched your idea walk out of the room under someone else's name, then so are you. Subscribe, leave a comment below if this story hit close to home. There are more where this came from, and justice, as it turns out, has a very good memory.